Welcome back to another episode of the Jordan Checker podcast where I'm joined by Killian Hamilton. Killian is a strength and conditioning coach and educator. Working as the Director of Programming and Innovation at Prescript, he has been able to expand on the principles behind skill acquisition, cognitive development, and adaptive decay. He is also the performance coach at Junxion Performance in Toronto, working primarily with NFL and NHL prospects, as well as the Director of Specialty Programming at YMP House of Athletes in Tampa, where he works with college footballers and basketballers, NFL players, as well as Major League Baseballers. In today's episode with Killian, we'll cover a variety of topics ranging from how to structure training in season and off season for the best results, the optimal weekly gym volume for athletes, the best workout structure to increase athletic ability, the simple things that elite athletes do, which you're not currently doing, what makes an amazing coach and what you might be doing wrong as a coach, the key to physical and mental stress management, the best gym warm-up, and much, much more. If you haven't already, please do subscribe on either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube and enjoy the episode. What is skill acquisition?
Yeah, great question, man. I think skill acquisition is, I guess objectively something. As skill acquisition relates to me, I guess it's been many things, but I guess I'll give you let's call it like the objective background on skill acquisition, and then let's, have my influence on it. But skill acquisition, as it relates to me, is essentially a model built by these two guys at Harvard, Fitz and Posner, late 1960s. And it's basically a model of motor learning or motor relearning. It was used a lot with people, post-traumatic car crash, post-injury and things like that. And it's also been studied, in adolescent groups and children. And it's basically a kind of systematic approach to understanding how it is that we learn. So there's three stages to it. There's a cognitive stage, an associative stage, and an autonomous stage. And it basically breaks down how we acquire and retain information, how we apply that information to a specific task, and then how over time we're able to take those applied skills or that understanding of something in a broad sense, and we're able to repeat it over time in increasing levels of performance, however we wish to measure that.
Yeah, perfect. So what impacts someone's ability then to develop those new skills?
Yeah, so I think when you start to look at, how someone's ability to develop skills, or how skill acquisition, I would say long-term affects performance, is just our understanding of really the mechanism of acquiring information, retaining that information, applying it to a task, and then that task becoming valuable over time. So things that could affect someone's ability to acquire and retain new information. Stress, number one, I would say, is the biggest thing. We're going to be less mentally capable of retaining and acquiring information in stressful environments than we are in less stressful environments. Time, and when I say time, more specifically, the frequency of exposure to a new task. If we are exposed to new tasks at a low frequency, we're going to pick up those skills a lot slower than others. Imagine trying to learn a bike by riding a bike once a month or once every few months. It's going to be something that you struggle to learn. Whereas if we can expose someone in small dosages daily to learning how to ride a bike, in speaking to someone when they're not on the bike about how a bicycle works, having someone watch other people ride a bicycle as well, all of those exposures in different ways or different gradients to a new skill are going to contribute to whether or not we learn that skill at a more or less rapid rate.
Yeah. So then when it comes from then a coaching point of view, when you have athlete in front of you, client in front of you, whoever it might be, they don't have to be world-class athlete, it could be Gen Pop still. Yeah. Is that this showing the importance of them breaking down, let's say you're coming at, we're going to learn how to do a deadlift. It's like, let's break down the movement, bite-sized chunks to start with. Let's learn how to do that, like having the training wheels on your bike in the first place. Because if you said we're going to do a conventional deadlift from day one of walking into the gym, most people are never going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think, when it comes down to, and why I enjoy using the skill acquisition model as it pertains to being a coach or working with anyone from a general population person to a professional athlete, is because in our environment of teaching skills, unfortunately, a lot of the things that we do with, not unfortunately, but an aspect of what we do with clients is physically taxing, right? It requires recovery. It's stressful. We're dealing with, manipulating someone's body in a way it hasn't been manipulated before. And all of these things, based on the stress and recovery of them, immediately delay acquiring a new skill. It's not like learning how to play piano. Someone could go at learning how to play the piano for as long as they could focus on learning the piano every single day, honestly, as many hours a day as they want, really, without any immediate, side effect or consequence. Now, we can't teach our clients how to deadlift for 8 hours a day, just taking breaks to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water. So in understanding that, I think that's where skill acquisition all of a sudden starts to become a concept that's extremely valuable in fitness, because it allows us to break down what we're trying to teach our clients for reasons other than the idea of breaking a movement down into like easier to learn pieces. It's actually about breaking a movement down into more recoverable pieces. Because if we were to teach the conventional deadlift every single day, you're going to have a lot of clients with sore lower backs, as almost everybody experiences when they first try to deadlift. I used to try to PR my deadlift every Thursday of every week, and I would try to hit a PR at 6 a.m. And if I couldn't hit it, I'd come back at 6 p.m. and try again. I was never without low back pain. So when we start to think of using this model, it's actually to break things down, not into something that's more into something that we can comprehend easier, but to something that we can recover from easier. If we can understand what makes a deadlift, if we can understand hip extension, if we can understand the joint angle at the knee, if we can understand, force production into the ground using our lats, bracing our core and things like that, we can start to break that deadlift down into these pieces where if we're seeing a client 2, 3, 4 times a week, they're going to have things that they can approach from a purpose of understanding how those pieces relate back to a deadlift by improving those qualities in isolation, and then altogether just a more recoverable model versus, maybe a more old school model of Monday we barbell deadlift, Tuesday we dumbbell RDL, Thursday we leg press. It's like, well, okay, that's only going to get so far with so many people. There are actually, a far more detailed way to break down, even a movement as simple as the deadlift, utilize this idea of graded exposure, and then probably get somebody to acquire that skill, maybe not even more efficiently, but in a way that's just a little bit more durable.
So is that where you come also then down to like a programming point of view when you compare a program you could put together on a ChatGPT these days in the matter of like 3 seconds versus you actually have a coach that knows how to coach, is that you are also structuring, like you mentioned, like the other movements that may be involved and the other muscle groups that are still causing an effect on that deadlift. You're not throwing them massively in the next day and then being like, oh, now we've had 1 day off from deadlifts, we're fine to go. But hey, we still trained every single muscle that was involved in the deadlift. Like you obviously still not, then that recovery and the stress has probably not come down still.
Yeah, and I think, it's so funny you bring up ChatGPT, because one of my favorite things to do, like once a week, is I just go into ChatGPT and I ask it to make all kinds of stuff, not even like usually never fitness related, because they don't care, but just others. They write me the pilot for a 90s sitcom, and it writes it, and it's incredible at what it does. But the thing with ChatGPT is it basically guesses, right? It's predictive. It's like predictive text. It sorts through all these models of the question you ask it, and it predicts the answers that you would want. And you have to kind of keep feeding it more and more details. The point I bring up about that, like, you program, you could ask ChatGPT to write you a deadlift program, or you could get a coach. If you ask ChatGPT to write you a deadlift program right now, it's going to write you something off of T Nation or Elite FTS, because there's so much of that literature available on the internet that you're going to get that program that's deadlift on Monday, pause deadlift on Tuesday, leg press on Friday. Whereas what you probably need is a program that's like single leg glute bridge. It's a program that has some aspect of barbell deadlift in it, maybe an aspect of single leg RDL. Maybe it has some kind of machine hamstring isometric at the joint angle of pulling the bar off the floor. Maybe it has pulling into pins. It has all these things that a coach can sit there and go, okay, not only do I have information on how you struggle to learn how to deadlift, but coaching someone isn't just about watching them deadlift poorly. It's about seeing them do every other movement in their program and going, oh, that's why you're not good at deadlift. Not just watching the deadlift and go, oh, you're struggling here. That's like a one-dimensional model. If somebody struggles with the deadlift, in my mind, it's probably less about that movement and it's about what other movements are in that program. And then how do they struggle at other movements where we're more exposed to seeing, what they do well and what they don't do well. Someone who's very physically literate, regardless if they know how to do a conventional deadlift, someone has a high degree of physical literacy, they're going to problem solve for the task of deadlifting pretty well. Someone with a low degree of physical literacy is going to struggle because the deadlift to them is very unique. Someone with a high degree of physical literacy has a very variable experience in the gym, is going to be able to associate other activities to the deadlift and figure it out right away. They'll be able to problem solve. And I think for me, that's what skill acquisition is from a client facing point of view, is as a coach, can you make your client a better problem solver? And then for me as an educator, skill acquisition for me is, can I make coaches better problem solvers and less, oh, you're bad at getting the bar off the floor, let's do pause deadlift,
Yeah, I guess ChatGPT at the end of the day just regurgitates everything that's already out there, doesn't it? It's just kind of like, I believe it's in its head, it's probably going, I believe from this question, this piece of information over here mixed with this piece of information over here equals what you were looking for. But like you said, it's a little bit of a guess at the end of the day as well, because there's so much out there. Then when it comes to, so just rewinding a little bit back to the recovery and stress side of things. So, athletes, that's their whole life. They get paid to do it. Cool. Excellent. Like, you can build their whole lives around it. Or you've got, two people then that can't do that. Gen Pop, obviously, so they're training is a part of their life. It's not their whole life. Like I always love this with my PT clients. I say fitness is not your life. It's a part of it, because, they're not getting paid $2 million a year to play soccer. But then there's also the athletes that maybe, I'm a javelin thrower. And most people that do athletics, you're not getting paid fucking anything. Even if you do make it to the top, you're getting minimal. So a lot of these people, marathon runners, they're working as well. Mm-hmm. How does that come into play then when we're talking recovery and stress? Because now they have this extra mental calorie burn, the mental stress of another job on top of their training as well.
Yeah, and I think that's where, one thing we teach, Prescript teaches this level 3 course. It's a really unique opportunity. It's essentially an internship at a training facility where we train pro athletes, where I work. So we bring a group of Prescript coaches down to the facility that I work out of, and they get to, work alongside some of these pro athletes. And on day one, we do intros. Luckily, we didn't have to do it on this podcast. And, I always get a chance to speak. And I always tell people, a couple rules when it comes to pro athletes. Don't let them stand still in the weight room. Always give them something to do. Number 2, treat them like human beings. Hand them a bottle of water, give them the towel. And number 3, help them up off the floor. And number 3, read the room. So to your question about, how do you deal with, say, people that aren't necessarily professional athletes, not entirely different than I deal with professional athletes, but in the idea of reading that room, right? Understanding that people, when they come in to the gym and they're your PT clients, you have to understand that those people are bringing in with them something that they encountered during the day. Maybe they had a great day. Maybe they got a raise. Maybe somebody fucking paid their invoice on time finally. This guy's got some extra money in his pocket. Maybe he's seeing the football game tonight, and he's coming in and he's high on it. You know what I mean? He's really excited. He's really ready to go. Or maybe your client lost their job or got stuck in traffic for 45 minutes or couldn't find a parking spot, and they're coming in with that. Well, as a coach, you just need to be able to read the room and go, do I have the availability in this session to ask someone to do something really simply that could potentially be frustrating? If we have an athlete and we're trying to, we're running a speed session, we're doing speed development with athletes, and we have an athlete who's just not getting it. They're tired. We know they went out on the weekend. They're not engaged in the warm up. They're taking a long time to get their cleats on. I want them to do the work they have to do. We don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to scale back that volume. Or I might remove starts from it entirely. We might not do any, 3-point start practice. We might go right into flies. We might go into resisted runs. Something where we're lowering that technical barrier to what it is, and we're getting them to do some output, get some good, solid work in, good work, but we're lowering that activity that could have a fair degree of frustration, not only from the athlete's point of view, but also from the coaching point of view of, is this person really in the mood for me to give them feedback that's not positive? And that's something I think of all the time as a coach is, where is this person at emotionally coming into this session? And is this the session I want to coach the conventional deadlift in? Or is me giving this person bad feedback on the conventional deadlift going to be their mental breaking point for the day?
Yeah. I guess that's probably also, that's we're now talking outside of sport. This is just a strong leadership quality to have, isn't it? Being able to read the room. Like if you're a business owner, being able to understand when someone walks in that door that day and they're 5 minutes late, rather than just spraying them straight away, understanding that maybe this was out of their control, if this is very unfamiliar for them to be demonstrating this behavior.
Yeah.
And it's like coming in with empathy first and then, solve the solution after that as well.
Yeah, I think it's entirely important. At the end of the day, I think, and this has, been something I've had to, grow into as well as a coach, because I was, previously an athlete as well. I'm 31 years old. When I played sports as a kid growing up, just like you, it's like coaches weren't empathetic. There was no room for having a bad day. There was no patting people on the back. Like you ate shit, So for me becoming a coach, I had to separate my understanding of what coaching was. Like, I don't think in 2024 your clients should have to eat shit. They're paying you for a service, and even the pro athletes I work with, I work in the private sector. I don't work for an organization. So when I work with a pro athlete, that athlete's paying me to be a part of their support system, and because of that, like you said, I think you do have to lead with empathy, because at the end of the day, what I need from my athlete is their best possible performance. I don't need to make them mentally tough. I don't need to develop them as a human being. I need this person in the conditions they're in to do the best they can possibly do at a very specific event. I need to be a part of that support system. And sometimes that's looking at someone and going, we're not even going to sprint today. We're not going to conventional deadlift today. Sometimes it's asking them, what is it that they want to do when they get in the gym? And you don't always have to agree with it as a coach either. If someone wants to do something, if it gets you that buy-in and builds that rapport, that door opens up an opportunity for you to do those more technical things, or the things as a coach that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah, 100%. So then when it comes to more like the more specifics of training than themselves. So, I get a lot of the whole sports specific training versus, your general physical prep, coming up on my social media, and the debate never seems to end. How specific, like, should you be in the gym movement wise? Like, take a tennis player, should they be on the cable, practicing their swing with the cable versus just doing the general movements like the deadlift, the squat, the bench press, or some ollie lifts or whatever it is as well?
Yeah. So a friend of mine, a virtual friend of mine out, Angus Bradley, I think just made a post about this. Honestly, I'll plug Angus. I think he's a great guy. I love talking.
I'll say, his stuff seems really good. That's where I see a lot of like the GPP side of things from. Yeah.
Big fan of Angus. He's great, and I agree with him entirely to a degree. And then, I think there's always room for discourse. But number one, so I think it's to understand that as a strength coach, this is for anyone, like talk about sports specific, athlete specific, anyone that's a strength coach that wants to get into working with professional athletes or athletes at any level, and that's what they want to do, needs to understand that everything you will ever do as a strength coach qualifies as GPP, general physical preparedness. But it's understanding what GPP means, I think, is like to go in a different direction than the question you asked. I think this is the important aspect of this. It's not the separation between sport specificity and general physical preparedness. It's that I don't have confidence that the majority of people in our industry could define what general physical preparedness means. If I said define it, people wouldn't have a clue, because I see people say GPP, and I see loaded carries, I see sled drags, I see some other bullshit thing. That's not GPP. GPP is general qualities prepared specifically. If anybody listens to this podcast and wants to write that down, that would be the only valuable thing I'm going to say this entire time. General physical preparedness is general athletic qualities prepared specifically. There's a very specific way to make people strong. We know, because anybody who's ever gotten strong has kind of gotten there the same way, maybe done different exercises, but relatively the programming aspect, the volume, the intensity, the duration is going to be very similar. Speed. We develop linear speed the same way. There's not a single person on this planet doing something massively different than one another who are getting people very fast. Speed is developed specifically. And lastly, endurance. We develop endurance and conditioning in a very specific way. And that gets bastardized all the time. Rucking with a 20-pound weight vest, a 10-kilo weight vest, and walking through the woods is not a good way of developing conditioning. That is a very useless way of doing that. Get on an assault bike, do Tabatas, sprint, run 400s, run 800s. I don't care what you do. Run a 10K. That's conditioning, right? So, I think the big thing in the debate of sport specificity versus general specificity is I think people are doing the GPP part wrong. I don't even think they're doing the sport specific part wrong. I'm more irritated when I see GPP get fucked up. But to your point, how specific is too specific? I think there is a line. Now, Angus made a post and he showed a guy getting off a Swiss ball and throwing a med ball. I actually don't hate that. I think that's kind of fucking cool. I would actually give that to somebody. I don't think that's too specific. What I think is too specific is what you're saying. Like, I'm not going to have someone in the gym, swinging a handle on a cable like a racket, or I'm not going to have somebody, trying to throw a med ball like a baseball, or, in a machine trying to emulate their golf swing. I'm not going to do that with an athlete. And I'm also not going to do skills practice in the gym. I'm not going to run football routes hugging a med ball. I'm not going to do that. But I would disagree that things that are ballistic and rotational, I would disagree that those are too specific. I think what we need to realize is that something like speed, velocity is a global adaptation of someone. Someone who can sprint fast probably has greater potential to throw fast. Somebody who can throw something very far probably has good potential to be very twitchy and explosive when they sprint, right? You're a javelin thrower. An aspect of javelin training is a lot of the times the same general trainings that long jumpers and triple jumpers and sprinters, all of us get together on the track and somehow cross paths at some point, right? There's a global adaptation is velocity. So I think in the gym working with athletes, I do enjoy doing things that incorporate moving or throwing something at a high velocity. I think you need to be careful as to how specific the patterns of those movements are. Like, I don't want someone throwing a med ball like they'd throw a baseball. But I don't mind someone planting their hips and trying to generate in their own way a extremely hard med ball throw, I think that's valuable in a sense, right? I don't want someone swinging a golf club in the gym, but I do want someone, say, throwing a med ball laterally from their hips and whatnot, right? Thousands of examples. But yeah, I think there's two ends to that spectrum of things that go wrong. General physical preparedness that isn't specific enough, and sport-specific training that is too far in the opposing direction and just becomes playing the sport in the gym.
Yeah. And I guess then would there probably be a fine line in the middle there somewhere as well that's kind of like we've talked about buy-in from the athlete or the client already as well. It's like, well, if this is what gets them razzed up about a session, maybe I have to throw in some bullshit to kind of keep them going as well. It's like, hey, I know that this one exercise is not optimal. It's a gross word, but like an ideal. It's not what we should be doing necessarily. But the dude loves the exercise. So if I throw that in halfway through the session, just as he starts to decline in some arousal and excitement levels, then it spikes him back up. And then the rest of the session, we're off to the races.
Yeah. And this is where I think, there's value in setting aside time at the beginning of a session to not even, do something specific to the sport, but to compete. And I think this is a large thing that's lacking in training. But funny enough, like, we see competing in the weight room exist at, I would say, the lowest barrier of entry of fitness. The big group classes, the F45s, the Orange Theories have some little competitive edge to them, who can row the furthest, get the most calories and whatnot. And then we see it disappear in this like muddy, overly complex aspect of the fitness industry. And then we get back to the pro athletes again. It's like, you better make them compete in the weight room, but it's like, give something that they're safe to compete at. Like, I don't think we need to throw the football around at the beginning of the session, but I will definitely make guys compete at who can throw a med ball further than the other person. I'll have guys see who can generate the most force in an overcoming isometric versus the other person, who can hold a yielding split squat the longest, who triple jumps the furthest. I'm going to do those things. So I think, to your point, I think where you can get that buy-in in the weight room is you can give guys something ballistic where they throw something, give guys something plyometric where they jump, have them sprint, have athletes that aren't, potentially training for some type of combine event where they have to run. Have athletes in the off season are just doing simple GPP, have them race each other every single day, gamify that race, make it competitive. Tons of different ways you can do that, but I think that's valuable in training. I think it gets buy-in, it gets people's heart rate elevated, gets the adrenaline going, it gets guys very vigilant in training, versus say doing 20 minutes of mobility with guys and then trying to hop into some kind of maximal type event or lift.
Yeah, you're not like stimulated them mentally to get really excited about what's to
Yeah,
come. Like we did like 4 kilo like overhead throws out at like throws training, and it's like, you've got like kind of like groups within groups of people that are competing, and it's like me
yeah,
versus the coach and one of the shot putters or something, and it's like
yeah,
this constant battle of like, oh, you who's going to win today sort of thing. And like, even if you're having a bad session and then you come back, all right, let's do some overheads, you're like back, you're ready to go, like, because especially for me, like, it's a movement that I know works really, really well and I connect really nicely with, so it just puts you in a different mental state as well, which I think, obviously, like we said, that mindset will determine massively what that session to come is for both Gen Pop and athletes as well.
Yeah, and that's where, like, I've come to incorporate like overcoming or yielding isometrics. I think they're super fun. They get people revved up, especially if you're in a room full of athletes and you can, hit it. We're all doing yielding split squats for as long as we can, or we're all doing a mid thigh pull as hard as we can on force plates. Doing that and then going, all right, now we're doing a max deadlift session. People are going to be ready to go. They're going to be vigilant. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be protecting themselves. They're going to be trying hard. And that's really like, I get a lot of questions about why I put what isometric where and whatnot. And, a big aspect of me programming overcoming isometrics is just because it's something you can try really hard at. You have to try really hard at an overcoming isometric, and there's little to no downside. So I love throwing those in before some type of maximal day, as long as you have someone there that can, make you work hard, or you yourself are self-governed enough to work really hard.
Yeah, 100%. So what's then, you touched on off-season training, like why some of these gamify strategies can be really handy off-season. What's the difference between like off-season, in-season training? Like, should we be doing, changing the volume, the frequencies of session, probably much changing depending on field athlete versus individual athlete as well. What are some main sort of compounding factors that seem to be across the board with the two?
I think the easiest way to break down off season versus in season that's helpful to people to start understanding it or start to utilize it is just the idea of collisions, right? Managing collisions or managing joint actions. Depending on your weightlifter, we'd manage joint actions. Thrower, we'd manage joint actions. Field like sport athlete would manage collisions. In season, there's a chaotic amount of collisions. Like if you have a rugby player, for example, there's no way, unless I sit and watch the player that pays me play every single time and count every single time he collides with somebody, tackles someone, goes into contact. If I count every event, maybe I have a rough idea of the collisions, but it's chaotic. It's an incontrollable variable throughout the season. So when we look at that, in season provides such a chaotic environment of collisions. The way I can support that in the weight room is to start to organize that training to limit as many collisions as possible. And this is where I think, concentric dominant exercises in season, isometric dominant programming in season is really, really helpful. Being able to break movements down into phases where we can start to understand, like, okay, if I throw an eccentric movement in here, that eccentric movement is going to come with a lot of damage, right? That eccentric movement lengthens a muscle, creates a lot of DOMs. It's going to make this guy really, really sore. Well, it's like, okay, in place of the eccentric phase or an eccentric dominant movement, I can place a yielding ISO. There's going to be eccentric qualities to that isometric, but it's going to limit collisions. It's going to limit joint actions. It's going to be very valuable to me to keep this player recovered. And then on the opposite side of that, I can take that same shape that player's creating, and I can load it concentrically. So I'm starting to subtract from the recovery value of that exercise. So I think that's where, off season, we want to get players strong again. We want to get players stable again. We want to get players in a position where they can recover from and manage collisions. eccentric dominant focus in training. In season, let's go replace that eccentric with a yielding emphasis in training and a concentric emphasis in training. And that's how I would again, these are kind of Cliff's notes, but really easily break it down. Off season's going to be, it's going to offer us more opportunities to work hard. So let's go, a big eccentric emphasis, tempos, squats, things that are full range of motion, things that challenge these lengthened positions of muscles. In season, let's challenge the shortened positions of muscles. Let's concentrically load people, and let's leave the eccentric largely off the table for something that's, maybe yielding in nature instead.
Yeah. So there's a little general potential there is reducing range of motion for some of these movements is a squat. I know, there we go. Lesson for me to learn here. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'll do off season, squat, almost my squat patterns almost become like a power lifter sort of style of training. I'm really trying to build that strength. We're not throwing as much, being a little less explosive is not kind of the end of the world, but at the end of the day, having strong legs is still going to lead to explosiveness anyway. And then, the last 8 weeks, leading into the end of the season, nationals and things like that, I'm doing box squats. I'm not going below parallel. It's a squishy box. I get a little bit of bounce at the bottom, so I'm not having to worry about that little bit of loading right at the end. Is that an example, a good example there?
Yeah, I think it is. But I think at this point now we can go even a step further to say, I'm not going to reduce your range of motion in training. I'm going to reduce the range of motion of that movement so you can move heavier weights quicker with less fatigue, but I'm going to find another way to still load the range of motion of those muscles that need to be loaded in those ranges, right? What comes to mind for me is glutes and hamstrings. Off season, guys feel great, guys feel healthy. This is largely across all sports. In season, quarter of the way through, halfway through, end of the season, hamstrings start getting beat up, hips get beat up, hip flexors get beat up, because like you said, we took away that movement that might have had potential to put stress on those lengthened positions of those muscles, or just load these muscles that are largely eccentrically oriented. Well, in season, what we can do to mitigate that, that's where that yielding ISO comes in. Maybe, if, we were working together, I'm doing the same thing. We're going, heavy box squat to a soft box at 90 degrees or just above with a narrow stance. But then in your training, maybe we're doing some kind of step down or some kind of loaded yielding hamstring movement on a GHD. And it's okay, we're still going to load those there, or we're going to hit some kind of yielding split squat, front foot elevated, get a little bit more hip flexion. Obviously, there's tons of different ways to do it. But I would say what it ends up becoming is, as we move in season from off season, I want to start to compartmentalize the stressors in your training. Rather than give you a barbell squat, which could have kind of numerous compounding stressors, I want to take that barbell squat, I want to break it down into its components, and I want to give you each component separately. So based on your recoverability or how you feel or what you need, we can just subtract a component we don't need from it. Example, I did powerlifting for a number of years. I'm generally pretty strong. I'm going back to masters track and field now at 31. Lots of people are giving me great advice on how getting certain lifts up would help me with certain things. But it doesn't apply to me because I'm stronger than I am good at sprinting. So it's somebody told me the other day, my triple jump would get better if I did heavy box squats. And the last time I did heavy box squats, I had 585 pounds on the bar. And I was I don't know if I need to squat more than 585 pounds to be good at triple jump. I think I'm just...
Yeah, look, are there any others doing that? The top triple jumpers are not doing that.
Exactly. And it's it would be cool for me to post on Instagram me doing heavy box squats and being I do this for, my long jump. But it's that's not... If I'm doing that, that's not my opportunity to get better at triple jump or long jump, So for me, it's okay, well, if I break that squat down into an eccentric step down, into a box squat, into some kind of hamstring yielding movement, and then some kind of deep quad and hip ISO, I can subtract the box squat now, right? I go concentrically, I'm fine. Concentrically, I can move weight. What can I manage eccentrically? Well, I can tempo squat a decent amount, probably enough So it's like, okay, where does this really go wrong for me? Well, it's like, okay, it doesn't go wrong at the bottom of the squat. It doesn't go wrong at the top of the squat. My ability to yield in these deep positions is good. My ability to overcome is good. My ability to concentrically produce force is good. But there's this middle ground position around 90 degrees where I really fail to transfer that load from eccentric to concentric. Something breaks down there, right? And that's where it's like, okay, well, what if I loaded a yielding iso here where I fail at my ability to organize in this position? Now I've eliminated 2/3 of a movement that was incredibly taxing to me, and I've kept the 1/3 I probably need the benefit in.
So how, to people that don't really understand an isometric exercise and why that may bring so much benefit as well, like why? So you're statically holding a load in a position, but why is that bringing so much value? And is that the fatigue and the DOMs and things is not occurring because of the lack of the stretch or the ripping of the muscle fibers?
Yeah, we're essentially so when we do something like a yielding isometric. So to put it simply, an overcoming isometric is working against an immovable object, and a yielding isometric is working against an unstoppable force, that force being gravity. Now, when we load into a yielding isometric, what we understand is that the eccentric phase of a movement usually ends in some type of yielding moment. So when we do a barbell RDL is a good example. We do a barbell RDL, we lower it to our knees. When we get to the bottom and we stop, we're yielding. We're yielding to gravity, right? We're fighting against gravity to not put the bar on the floor, so we're yielding. Well, if we think about that, those hamstrings become lengthened, more lengthened. We're applying length to those hamstrings in that eccentric phase, and they're at their most disadvantaged at the bottom in that yielding moment. So for most people to understand, when we work through an eccentric or a concentric phase, we're working into one of these extremely valuable moments or aspects of a movement. We're only lowering into that phase to get to that yielding moment. Well, we can just get to that yielding moment and stay there, right? We do a hamstring iso on a GHD, and we can hold it for the length of a set of RDLs without having to go through the repeated task of executing well a very hard RDL. I can do 30 seconds of work. I could do 60 seconds of work in a split squat without having to squat German volume training 10 by 10 at a 4:020 tempo. I just do 60-second hold at 90 degrees, and I've got that same amount of work in the valuable position of that lift, that aspect of that lift that sets it apart from everything else. What makes a squat squat? It has a valuable or quality yielding moment at the bottom, right? So if I just get to that moment, I'm getting the valuable part of that squat out, right? When it comes to, athletics, let's say, or when it comes to interacting with force interaction.
Yeah. And then so say in the case of then someone's going to take this and be like, all right, I don't need to do full range squats, just do isometrics. They clearly sound like a really good option. Why would you still then, what's the really strong importance of being like, no, we still need these other things. This is just like an in-season sort of tool that we use to minimize some fatigue and things like that as well.
Well, because anytime, if we, keep on the topic of athletics, pardon me, we have to understand that we are never just doing one aspect of this force interaction, right? We're never just yielding in athletics. We're going from yielding to absorbing. We're going from absorbing to transferring to producing force. Well, if I'm just holding a yielding isometric, I am neither transferring, I might be distributing, but not transferring that, amortizing that, and changing the direction of that force, something that I would do, say I was jumping or running or colliding with someone. There are these two other aspects of the way we interact with force that occur in athletics, where I'm going to need that athlete or myself to be not only prepared to do those things, but be able to ingrain in myself a variety of movement strategies to do so. So I think that's where understanding like full range of motion training is very good for strength development. It's very efficient for strength development. Moving joints through full ranges of motion, applying length to a muscle and then allowing that muscle to both contract and relax are going to be very important for the elastic properties of that muscle.
Yeah.
And we can grade that contraction and relaxation of that muscle in a variety of ways through tempos and plyos and just regular old resistance training itself. So, there's not a less value to lifting, but it's like you said, it's understanding in season, I'm mitigating for a lot of things that are already occurring. In off season, I'm probably not playing as much. I'm not encountering as many collisions, as much, damage to the body. I'm not running maybe near as much or to the same intensity. So I'm going to replace that in the gym with a lot of activities that allow me to work at a baseline. So when I go back in season, I don't get destroyed. But in season, I'm getting all of those things, right? I'm getting into vulnerable positions. I'm running. I need to recover. I'm going to start to mitigate those things in season. But yeah, I think there are a few athletes out there that wouldn't, benefit from, or I think there's few athletes out there that should truly ignore, most movements done in their conventional sense, and I still program back squatting and front squatting and conventional deadlifts and RDLs for athletes, off season and, in season maybe, but it's all just going to come down to, how much stress and from where, and do I need more of it?
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the volume game, you said in a post a while ago, volume is the diameter of the pizza. Frequency is how many slices you cut, regardless of the size of the pizza, is no more or less. So how much? Then obviously, so you've taken that, and we go, well, frequency. That doesn't change the volume. So what volume should we be aiming for in certain circumstances?
Yeah. So I think there's too much of a discussion around volume in training. Now, volume exists in training. It has to. We should discuss it at some point. But it's always people's first question is, how much of something should I be doing? Versus specifically what I should be doing and how hard should I be doing it. So the volume of something we're going to do is going to be so much more dependent on how intense it is, what it is exactly, and what else exists in the program that necessitates we do more or less of it. If the only lower body movement in my program is back squat, I'm probably going to do a relatively high volume of back squatting. But if in my program there's back squat, there's also, box jumps, there's also sprinting, and then there's, numerous other lower body accessory movements, that volume of back squatting can be reduced to a large degree. And with the reduction of volume in the back squat, the intensity is going to naturally have to go up, that it still provides some level of stimulus. So, I think most people start their question with how much of something should I do, when it's usually one of the last questions that I think of, myself. And I think that just largely comes from, unfortunately, probably a decade or 2 decades worth of bodybuilding content being created, where recommendations like 50 sets of shoulders a week. If you ever count how many sets of something to do, you should be euthanized, because it's an insane way of doing something, right? Because it's the same thing as saying, like, so I teach for Prescript. If we just said we have taught, 100 courses, it's like, how many people attended each course? 1 or 1,000? That's a very different number of people, right? That's a largely different experience, right? I have 1,000 coins in my backpack. Well, are they worth $1 or are they worth $0.01, right? And that's kind of how you have to look at training, right? Training is looking at training volume is essentially like a primary school, comprehension question for math, where it's, Tim has $4, John has 8/4. Who has more money, right? It's like, these movements each have their own value in training. They're going to have their own impacts. So I think you really need to kind of start from the aspect of, how many days a week am I going to train? That's a great question, right? Because it's going to immediately dictate how much work I do. If you're trained, you can train, and that's like, I train 7 days a week. People always ask me, how do you possibly train 7 days a week? I don't do shit. I do half as much as everybody you've ever met, because I'm there every day, and some days and the other thing too is, like, if I don't feel good, I do less, because I don't want to do more. Right. But we kind of get too strict with things. So I think the first thing people need to do in their program is forget about the volume entirely. Fuck it. Fuck it off. I don't care. Write down all the work that you think you need to do. And by work, I mean exercises. Write down here, my goal in the next 3 weeks is to improve my ability to produce force vertically. I want to use these 3 exercises to express my ability to produce vertical force. Great. Write those 3 exercises down. Okay, in order for me to be prepared to do this exercise, here are 2 exercises that will increase my preparedness for that exercise. Great. This exercise fucks me up in this way. Here's 2 exercises that are going to make sure that this exercise doesn't kill me. Great. That's 6 exercises. Now, based on what that exercise is executed with, is going to determine its intensity, and just do it RPE 10. And it's like, that's going to make volume really easy because it's how many times you can repeat that same effort. How many sets of barbell bench press can I do? A barbell is pretty useful between 75 and 100% of your estimated 1 rep max. 80% of a 1 rep max is an 8 rep max. That means that I could do 2 sets of 4 with 3 minutes rest in between. There you go. There's your volume. I got 2 sets of 4 or 4 sets of 2 with 80% with 3 minutes in between. So it's like, okay, take that to the absolute limit. Well, it's like if I use a dumbbell I can't load as much as a barbell. That's going to be useful between like 50 and 80% or 50 and 75%. So it's like, okay, grab dumbbells for, if I can do a maximum of 8 reps with a barbell, I can do a maximum of 12 reps with the dumbbell. Okay, so I'm going to work up to an 8 rep max with dumbbells and try to do that as many times as I can, still hitting 8. When I can't hit 8 anymore, that's probably the volume I can do. Then you're probably got 2 sets in you. You get to a cable machine, you load a cable for 15 reps, you take 2 minutes off. You could probably do 1,000 sets of a cable exercise, right? So I think for people to understand, it's like, write down the work you want to get done, divide it amongst days that make it realistic, and then make each exercise literally RPE 10. You're only going to be able to do so much volume.
So it's kind of like increase the intensity, and as a byproduct, you're going to find how much volume you can withstand.
Yeah, and like how much you can, and how much you can, recover from. So I think this idea. So the idea of trying to control or understand programming to the degree people want to, and they never want to understand the part of programming that matters: exercise selection, thoughtfulness, coaching, talking to your athlete and learning how to make them better. You come from an athletics background, which is like literally anything works if the coach is really good.
Mm.
I've seen people run really fast and their program is, jump rope. And it's like, and their weightlifting is leg raises and leg press, right? And then they're way faster than me. But the guy who coaches the sprinting is really good at coaching sprinting. So I think the thing that people need to understand, especially, in this generation of people, working in fitness online, is there is no amount of controls you can apply to a program to make you a good coach. Like every Friday or every day of my program, I send my clients a, readiness questionnaire and a preparedness questionnaire. And I ask them if they had a good workout. And then I have a little box in my spreadsheet that adds up all their volume and what percent, all these spreadsheets and bullshit. You know what? No amount of doing that is ever going to make you good at coaching people. What's going to make you good at coaching people is having a human conversation with somebody, watching their lift and being like, hey man, squats look like dog shit today. What's going on? Anything happen? And the person's like, yeah, I'm fucking tired. I got boards to be a PT at the end of the month and I'm stressed. And it's like, great. You know what we're going to do next week? We're just not going to barbell squat. I had a guy and he couldn't use RPE for the life of him because he's just very immature. And he was getting all stressed. Every week it was a meltdown. Squat doesn't feel good. Squat doesn't look good. And every week I was like, you just overshot it again. You overshot it again. And then I was like, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to use the barbell anymore because you're not mature enough to use the barbell. And now training, smooth sailing, loves it. We're just doing machines and everything that's not powerlifting. And he has a great time, So, I know I went in a different direction, but I think my answer to how much volume is good volume is if as a coach, you're still looking for the answer as, what volume marker should my client be hitting, I think you're looking in the wrong direction, because you're looking at programming and you're not looking at coaching.
Yeah, I think it touches on a point that I like to harp on people is that, like, say, as a personal trainer, there's a reason the word that comes first is personal.
Yeah.
And it's understanding who's in front of you, having these conversations. And it was a point that I was going to touch on later, but I believe it's very important that people, if they're wanting to go down the online route of any form, is that you need to have, like, been on the gym floor. You got to eat shit. You got to get amongst it, because you start to understand people a little bit more. Now, I understand there's probably ways where maybe someone doesn't have to, if they've had maybe not gym floor, but they've had some form of face-to-face coaching experience to understand these things. But like you said, it's still very hard. If you've done a session and I'm looking then on Trainerize and you wrote that it was a 10 out of 10 difficulty, and I ask you after the session's done how you're feeling, well, it's too late for me to make adjustments to the rest of the session. So that's why, like, it's not the premium service compared to a face-to-face session.
Yeah, no, I think it's mandatory to work in person, and I think it's mandatory because I've seen coaches that are very, very intelligent, extremely intelligent, probably know more about the body than I do, and I've seen them work in person, and it's embarrassing. And I think that's because that's not their experience. Never worked alongside a human being. They don't know how to hold a conversation. They don't know to pick an athlete up off the ground. Like, if you have an athlete doing floor press, when they're done their set, help them up. Like, listen, if you were training me right now and we did 100 med ball toe touches, I'm not getting up on my own. And if you don't offer me a hand and pick me up off the ground, I'm also never going to pay you again. And like, I think it's such a necessity to be in person with people. Like you said, it's personal training. Learn to read the room. Learn to understand how someone acts when they have a certain exercise. Learn how much rest people want to take. Like, a good example, when I was a personal trainer at a gym, just training regular people, I never counted how many reps of anything anyone ever did. I would have a stopwatch. It's a true story. It's what I always did. I didn't count reps because I couldn't multitask. I'm really bad at watching someone lift. I was just working with I work at a facility with hockey players, and I was working with a hockey player right before this podcast, and I miscounted his reps, I guarantee you, 5 times. I was like, one more, and he was like, dude, we've already done 2 more than you said to do. And I was like, yeah, just do 1 more. And I was like, oh, that's it. And he was like, we still have 3 left. And I was like, dude, I don't fucking know how many we're doing. So what I do, and what I used to do, and I still do it now, is I have a stopwatch, and I set the stopwatch for how long the set needs to be. If we're doing 8 to 10 reps, it's about 60 seconds to work. I just start a stopwatch for 60 seconds. I watch the person move, and I go slower, faster, more control, be more aggressive, and I watch the watch, and then I go, it gets down to like 51 seconds, and I go, 1 more rep, and then they're like, I'm like, we're good. That's what it is. I have no idea. I'm doing 900 other things. I'm not counting how many reps you do. It doesn't matter. And to that point, it's like, if you're counting volume, you're doing it in all the wrong ways. If you're not qualifying the volume, this is the big thing. 50 sets of shoulders. What exercise, what intensity, how many repetitions for how much time, and then my thing is, so here's my thing to go on a rant that I want to go on about. A lot of people want to sound really smart. Maybe I'm one of these people. I'm not exempt from it. But a lot of people try to get really, like you said, premium service, custom, really intelligent programming. And then you can ask one question and absolutely fucking tear it to the ground. It's like somebody goes, yeah, we're going to do 30 sets of shoulders this week. Okay, what's the exercise? What's the absolute intensity? What is the relative intensity versus the absolute intensity? How much time did you spend in the eccentric versus the concentric? How much time did you spend in a yielding versus overcoming position? We can do this a whole bunch of different ways. What exercise came before it? What exercise came after it? Was the session in the morning? Was the session in the evening? How many calories did your client eat before the session? The problem with getting too specific in programming and not better at coaching is somebody like me who comes along who's an asshole and asks one question and blows it all up and makes it seem really stupid when it never had to be. You could just go, we're doing these 4 exercises for shoulders. We're doing approximately this many reps. It should feel like an RPE 10, and I wouldn't have a problem. But the minute you say, yeah, in my experience, clients do better with 50 sets of shoulders, I'm going to rip you apart.
Well, that's it, I think, and also a surefire way for a client, athlete or gen pop to quickly find out whether their coach knows what they're talking about is to ask that simple little why question. And if they answer with like something that just goes on for days, you're like, okay, now you're muffling and you're yapping a bit here. If I have like gen pop client, they're like, oh, why do we do this amount of exercises or this or whatever? I'm like, well, because you're about to go to work. You don't need to train for 2.5 hours. Like, you're not a professional athlete or whatever it is. But at the same time as well, generally from the athletes I've seen and the people that have, or the powerlifters, whatever, that are really, really strong, they get like the best results from actually doing way less than what the gen pop try and do as well, because intensity is so high that you just can't, like, I love, like, I really struggle if someone's like, let's have an easy session. I'm like, no. Let me train hard. Just make me do less, because I cannot train like at a low intensity. It's just not in my DNA.
Yeah. No, it's entirely true. You know what I mean? Like, I had a client this morning. And it's Friday. So I really try to train him for, like, I'm not kidding, with warm up and like a little conditioning on the bike, 35 minutes. That's how long our session is. Now, I was a PT once. If you told me you trained somebody for 35 sessions, like, oh, we're 35 minutes. Like, what do you get done in 35 minutes? You know what we get done? Just enough for a Friday. It's Friday. He works from home. He drives into the gym. His girlfriend's calling him on the phone. Shit's hitting the fan. And I'm like, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to do we got 5 exercises. We're just going to do them as a circuit. We're going to repeat it 4 times, and you're going to leave. Now, we're not doing the exercises as fast as possible. We're not uncontrolling the tempo, but we're just splitting up the exercises. I'm giving him whatever rest he feels like he needs, kind of taking all of his accessories from the week, and we put them all on Friday. He doesn't need as extensive as a warm-up if it's just accessories. Kind of hop in, get the heart rate up on the assault bike, hit the 8 accessories that we skipped during the week, because we spent a lot of time drilling skill and technique. So I was like, we don't have time to dedicate good effort to the hypertrophy stuff or the accessory stuff. So we throw it on a Friday. He basically does 50% of a session on Friday. He gets to leave. He's gassed because he can take every exercise to RPE10. And at the end of the day, it's like, kind of, what's the point? You know, at 35 minutes, he's begging to finish. And it's like, we're done, man. Let's get out of here.
No, it's definitely had conversations like that plenty of times before. On the topic of warm-ups though as well, not obviously for a session like that, a little bit different, but what should warm-ups look like? You know, there's some people that say go on the treadmill for 10 minutes and then we'll go straight into it. Others will say do 4 sets of of squats because that's your first exercise and you're ready to go. Yeah.
So, number one, I think people should do 5 minutes on the treadmill. Better, I think people should do 5 minutes on the bike. Even better, I think people should do 5 minutes on the assault bike. Best, I think people should run 10-meter sprints as quickly as they can. Reason being, get your adrenaline up, get your heart rate up, move through space, problem solve, be aggressive, feel effort, like actually put some fucking effort into working out. Have to recover, have to manage your breathing, have to pay attention. I think people need to start their session with something they can push. And the reason why it makes sense to put somebody on the bike for 5 minutes and turn the intensity up to 20 is because we're not maybe yet prepared to take an exercise to RPE 10. We're never not prepared to take cardio to RPE 10. And I want that person prepared for effort. And a warm-up should prepare you for effort. And we should all get rid of the term warm-up and just write prepare for effort. What takes my client from being a sack of shit in their car in the parking lot to being prepared for absolute effort in the gym? Whatever that needs to be is a good warm-up, and it should be really fucking fast. It's not 10 minutes of mobility. It's not even mobility if it doesn't need to be mobility. I don't do mobility. I go to the track and I don't do mobility. Maybe like the week before a track, like a meet, I'm like, I'm going to do some mobility because I'm so sore from like doing block starts every day. But outside of that, I've never, ever done mobility prior to a lifting session in the gym. Not conventionally the way people see it.
Yeah. What's your mobility in general then? Is that something that people should be doing, or is that kind of like, if you can't squat full depth, elevate your heels, do a front rack, and you'll squat full depth? or,
I think,
a
yeah.
deeper range at least.
So I think the issue is most people don't train at an intensity great enough that actually necessitates recovery or challenges them in a way that they understand how their body feels. Now, if you grew up doing some form of athletics or sports, you've probably been sore before. And this is about general population people, not about athletes. But athletes have probably been sore before, that they have a better relationship with not feeling good from training. So they're able to kind of live in it and go, I'm okay. Regular people who have no history of doing anything, the slight bit of discomfort they feel is like, what can I do to not feel like this anymore? Quit. Like, I don't know how to tell people. I don't know how to tell people that ever since I was allowed to play sports, my feet have hurt every morning that I wake up. I had a guy the other day who he's, doing some athletic stuff in the gym. He's sprinting all the time. He's jumping. He's lifting weights. And he messaged me. He's like, what do you do about plantar fasciitis? And I was like, I don't think I've ever had it. And he's like, well, have you ever had it where the bottoms of your feet are really painful in the morning when you get up? And I was like, is that plantar fasciitis? And he was like, yeah, that's what it is. And I was like, then I have it every single day of my life. He's like, well, what do you do for it? And I was like, I'm not a pussy. I go and I take a piss, and I go and I make breakfast, and I put comfortable shoes on when I'm not doing stuff. And that's the other thing. Stop putting yourself in positions to be uncomfortable. I'm wearing I wear the most expensive running shoes I can find when I walk around. These aren't even the most expensive. These are some Asics Metaspeed thing. My friend is a marathon runner, and he saw me wearing these on the subway. And he's like, if a marathon runner saw you wearing those on the subway, they'd have a heart attack. And I was like, these are really comfortable. I'm going to wear them all the fucking time. They're great. And I wear them all the time. Then I'm not doing something where I have to take them off. So back to your point of like, what do people need to do as a warm-up, or do people need to do mobility? You need to do mobility if doing mobility prepares you for effort. If you need to roll your lat out in order for you to feel like you can actually train your upper body, you need to do mobility. But what you need to do first, and I'll use an analogy about this, and maybe you'll relate to it as well. My dad, growing up, my dad would put salt and pepper on all his food all the time, regardless of what the food was or if he ever tasted it. He would get food and he would just salt. And my mom would always be like, taste it first. You don't even know what it tastes like. He's like, it's going to need salt. It's going to need pepper. And that's people with mobility. People with mobility are just like, you got to do it. And I'm like, have you tried seeing how you feel first? But the problem is we've been ingrained that there's some value in mobility, and it's contextual. Mobility for me is getting on the GHD, doing an overcoming hamstring ISO, doing a yielding hamstring ISO. It's throwing a med ball against the wall 50 times. That makes me feel like I'm ready to work. It allows my body to feel a little bit more open. It allows me to access a lot of different ranges, I find. It also just prepares me for effort, because the first 5 minutes I'm at the gym, I don't want to do anything. So I got to do something that's not lifting to allow me to relax and apply myself in a concentrated way. So do people need to do mobility if it prepares you for effort? But what you need to do before mobility is sit with yourself and really understand how you feel first. And if you're just wasting your time, because I think people just do it because they're supposed to.
Yeah, and then I guess they end up doing 20 minutes of that, and they're like, fuck, I've only got 25 minutes to go, and then their session's tiny, and they get a shit workout, don't see results, and then hate the gym.
Yeah, and they're like, I had to take so much time to do mobility. Mobility always takes me so long. It's like, why does it? And that's the other thing. Did you try squatting first? Did you try a couple warm-up sets of squat? Here's the other thing. Somebody asked me the other day, somebody I coach, they were like, hey, in the program, you have 4 sets of this exercise. Now, is that counting warm-up sets? And I was like, no. Why? How would I know how many warm-up sets? And they're like, how do you know when you're at the working weight? Well, when it matches the RPE. It's like you should. Do you know how many people out there? None of us do. None of us have any idea how many people out there look at a program and it says 3 sets, and that means empty bar, some kind of weight, and then 1 set at some kind of other weight. That's why people are doing so much in the gym, because every exercise is worth nothing. People aren't warming up long enough. That's the other thing. You know what I do when a squat doesn't feel good? I'll keep squatting that same weight that didn't feel good until it feels good, and then I'll go up. If I unrack 150 kilos and I squat it and I'm like, man, I feel slow, my legs are tired, my back is sore. Do you know what I do? Take 3 minutes off and I do it again, and it moves a little bit quicker, and I do it again. And then when it finally moves at the speed it should move for that weight, then I'm like, all right, let me go up today. But if I squat it like 2 times and I'm like, still feels like shit, do you know what I do? I don't squat. I'm like, fuck, I'm too beat up. I don't then spend 15 minutes trying to do mobility and then still inevitably probably have a bad day anyway. So I think people need to train harder early on in their career. I think people need to accept that you're not supposed to feel good, and no one ever said you were. And if your trainer is selling you the lie that you're going to feel good and you should never feel uncomfortable, that trainer themselves as well is probably a big pussy who's never felt anything in their entire life. Because my body hurts every single day.
Oh, 100%. I can vouch for that. Like my arm, like I don't remember in the last 6 months where I've had a day where I'm like, wow, I feel really good out here. Like, and I think it's very similar. I think actually, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Alex Hormozy, obviously more in the business world, but he's like, happiness is not the goal. And it's the same sort of thing here. Like feeling good was never the goal. It was the fact that like going to the gym, all the other benefits that come as a result of it. Like, yeah, okay, you're going to feel better as a whole compared to the dude that's 50 kilos overweight sitting on the couch, whatever. But we're talking like short term little niggles. They're going to happen. That's a part of life. That's a part of lifting. Just like in order to achieve success or any sort of results in business, at work or whatever, it's going to come with the niggles as well.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that people don't realize is like performance doesn't feel good. It's probably not supposed to feel good, but it's also not a really big deal. Like I can say confidently, when my body has felt the quote unquote best, or when my body has felt what I should say is the least, when I feel the least of my body during the day, my athletic performance is probably the worst. Because you're like hypotonal, like you just have no muscle tone, you have no rigidity, you don't have any explosiveness. You're also not like wired. You know what I mean? Like I drink a lot of caffeine. I feel like I train decently hard, and I try to do something in the gym every day that like I always tell people. So people go like, how hard should I pull on the bar in like an overcoming isometric? And I tell people when I do the isometrics I do them to a degree that I actually get emotionally upset. Like when I posted a video of me doing a hamstring isometric on a GHD, and someone's like, how hard do you like pull on the handle? And I was like, I pull on it till I actually get mad. And like I've been told at the gym that I'm like too loud on the machine because I'm fucking like swearing at it. And it's like I don't leave the gym until emotionally I'm in an unwell place. But you know what? I feel great. And like leaving the gym knowing that like I almost killed myself, it makes me happy. I'm not saying clients need to feel that way, but you need to understand that like growth is an uncomfortable process, and you're probably not going to be the one who gets there comfortably.
Yeah, 100%. Then when it comes like the more back to the specifics of training, I guess there as well. Like, so we talked about obviously not necessarily counting the reps as well, but then when it comes to like a generalization of like low reps versus high reps, there's a bit of a debate, I guess, in that as well. Understanding that, you can't really build strength doing, well, to some extent, top end strength doing like 20 reps all the time. So how do you try and juggle the two of those a little bit?
I think people need to understand, just simply put, different modalities, different tools in the weight room are going to be, pretty intrinsically efficient at different rep ranges, right? And, simply like every exercise that's not a skilled exercise, and for some people, barbell squatting and deadlifting and bench press is going to be a skilled movement. Your technique is going to be so poor that it doesn't feel like anything, it doesn't look like anything, and it's never the same thing twice. Well, that doesn't count for what I'm about to say. But for literally everything else you do, you should be doing that thing as heavy and as hard as possible. And every modality is going to give you an environment for effort that's different. I can't load up enough weight on a cable stack to do a 3-rep max pec fly. The cable's so unstable. Like there's no leverage to do this for 3 reps. Like you're not going to have the external or internal environment to create the stability necessary to do a 3-rep max on a cable stack. But you can do it in a barbell bench press. So you should be utilizing a rep range that allows you to get to that RPE 9-10 on whatever it is you're doing based on the, stability or the constraint that the machine applies. Like you said, you're not going to get ultimately strong doing 20 reps on back squat because it's just a criminally underloaded movement. That if I can load it and do a 1 rep max, the closer I am to that thing that it does, more likely I'm closer to it being good.
Yeah. How much does then that strength like relate to athletic performance and things like that? So like, strength alone, is that a bit of a, understanding that someone could be athletic and explosive?
So people that are athletic and explosive potentially express strength well because they're very dominant in the concentric phase of movement. That's why like explosive shot putters, box squat 300 kilos, because they're good at concentrically moving something away from themselves, moving it away from the ground, right? But in the inverse, very strong people in the gym oftentimes are pretty shitty at athletics because they're really good at doing the other thing. They're really good at bringing things towards the earth. They're eccentrically dominant people. They can yield to force really well. They've grown up with tempo. They've done a lot of reps. They emphasize the eccentric movements. They choose eccentrically dominated movements. So they oftentimes can't express it athletically because they've built the opposing side of the movement on the force velocity curve. So that's where I think we have to understand is that, athletic people are explosive, not because they're amazing, strong athletes. The athletic people often go into the gym and express strength through a concentric means. Eccentrically dominant strength athletes are people that lift weights usually don't do athletics well because athletics is concentric. There is no sport that is eccentrically oriented where I'm trying to move towards the earth or run backwards away from someone else.
Yeah. And I guess an element of that also is just because someone's strong doesn't mean they're actually coordinated or have any like the skill in those elements either, would it? Like it's whereas the reverse, like it's if you can sprint fast, you're probably coordinated enough to do a back squat.
Yeah, it's such a high stakes motor unit activity to sprint, like the coordination and repetition that's required to sprint at a very high level can be redirected. The general adaptation of max velocity can be specifically directed towards a sport. Now, some sports are more skilled than others, require a greater amount of time. But for example, there are a bunch of rugby players in the NFL, the National Football League, that never played football. But they have all the general qualities that if put in a rather less skilled position on a football team, they don't do half bad at it.
Yeah. I guess and that's the, reading the game, all those other factors as well, isn't it? Like there's the instinct of an athlete, I guess you could call it.
Exactly.
So then when it comes to the structure of a workout, is there any should we be doing plyos first? Like should it be speed, power, strength, or should it be strength, power, speed? Like is there a structure there that is important?
No, I think you hit it on the head, right? And you can think like speed, power, strength. People are going to say that. And people are like, oh, it's pretty smart. Well, what does that mean? It's literally max velocity, no load to the attempt to create a max velocity under maximal load, right? So highest velocity, least external load, lowest velocity, greatest external load. That's how a session should move from unloaded to loaded. And if you're unloaded, you should be trying to achieve RPE10 moving at a max velocity. And if you are loaded, you should be attempting to an RPE10, which is inevitably going to move very slow. Like we can break these really complex things down really easily. You hit it on the head. A session should go unloaded to loaded. It should go from unloaded and fast to loaded and slow. It should go from plyometric to ballistic, from jumping with nothing to jumping and throwing something, to non-ballistic to isometric, right? Jumping no weight, throwing something that has its own value or mass or weight, to non-ballistic, trying to throw something but I can't throw it, a heavy bench press, to isometric, trying to press something and I can't press it, to failing to trying to press it, to slowly lowering in the eccentric phase, to yielding it right above the ground, to failing at that. So yeah, unloaded to loaded, fastest to slowest, from moving away from the ground to moving towards the ground.
Yeah. And with that, like
simple idea, it's such like simple ways to describe it. But if any of those make sense to people, like they can easily program using those criteria.
And I guess that starts to tap in. They could almost use that the ballistic, the plyos, and that sort of stuff as their warm up as
Yes.
well to kill two birds with one stone. Because like it is kind of that getting yourself going sort of stuff and building, like it's kind of prepping you for those heavy loaded exercises as well.
You got it.
When it comes to then the power movements, and we're talking like say like an ollie lift or something like that, how important is that people actually learn the skill of ollie lifting and do those things to develop power versus let's you're probably more people are more likely to be able to jump in a trap bar and do a jump or do a trap bar, shrug pull or something like that very quickly and see a similar sort of movement.
So the big difference here, and I've been guilty of this, I've said for, a mass, a general population of people or for a large group of people, developing athleticism is probably just as easily done in a trap bar. But, I'm kind of guilty of saying that, and I don't think that's the right statement to make, and I wish I never said it. I think the truer thing to understand is I think Olympic lifting incorporated into a strength program early on enough and properly enough has a greater benefit than late stage simple power movements. So this is the way I want to word it. I think Olympic lifting has a greater benefit and carry over to sport if introduced early on enough in an athlete's career and coached well enough that it does get to transfer. I think, unfortunately, with the state of physical education, athletics, training that's out there, we end up having to give people trap bar jumps because it's what they can manage in that instance, in that moment in their sport where they need some kind of value. But overall, Olympic lifting, in my opinion, champions any of the simplistic power movements because it requires coordination and timing. And a trap bar jump doesn't require coordination and timing. The power clean does. So I do think Olympic lifting is better, but I think we have to look at it into the context of, if I receive a player who in 9 weeks is going to go to a combine, is 9 weeks enough time to load and progress in a weightlifting movement to the point of transferable stimulus? And if it's not, I just have to take the second best option. But like, if I one day have kids and I want my kids to be pro athletes, they're also going to start whatever sport they start playing. They're going to start weightlifting at the same time so that they can clean 200 kilos and play their sport really well. I think that's going to have a relationship.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because I know like in Australia as a generalization, but like it's not something that's focused at all. And I don't know to what extent, obviously, like I've seen clips of people in like high schools in America, like year 7, they're kind of just, the broomstick or whatever, like practicing technique, and they're getting that started, initiating that process. So it's not to say that you have to load up 100 kilos when you're 14 years old, but it's that movement process. And my dad's a strength and conditioning coach, and this is where I'm very lucky to have, he taught me the movements when I was younger, while I kind of had a little bit of fun with other things in the gym. And come when I was like year 10, it's like, year 11, you can start to just be like, I'm already starting to add load because I've rehearsed so much. Whereas everyone else was now rehearsing come the end of school once they made it to the state team or whatever it was. And it's like, well, you're behind. Like it's making it really hard.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. Like, I think, people are lucky enough to be in programs where it is encouraged early on. Some people aren't. And then I think, it's not up to us to say what is better or what is worth. I think it's, again, up to that coach that interacts with that player and goes like, where's this guy at? And you know what? If I get a guy who's, a professional athlete, he's under contract to a team, and I have him for the off season, and I talk to him and I go, have you ever done a high hang clean? And he goes, no. You know what I'm going to do? Then we're not doing it, Same thing is like probably the same thing for a multitude of movements, right? Do you do a lot of bench press? No. Do I have something else I can put in your hands right now and load it? I'm probably, unfortunately, going to go that direction within the constraints of my job, But yeah, if I started everyone from day one, we're going to ask to grass squat and weight lift and do everything else, But unfortunately, later on, you can't do that. Same thing goes for speed development, though. Like I think people should learn how to sprint out of a 3-point stance or a 4-point stance or sprint out of blocks, But you get a soccer player, and even though I still think there's really good benefit to understanding to accelerate properly, if I have a soccer player for 8 weeks, am I going to beat up his first 3 steps? Or am I just going to get him to run fast a lot in different conditions? Probably just run fucking fast. You know what I mean? Like I don't have the time to lose a session to learning the 3-point stance.
Yeah, I think it's also like it shows the power of why maybe more people should like track and field is such a powerful sport for just a
Yeah.
developmental point of view as well. It's like run fast, throw far, jump high. Like it's you put all these things together and then you mix that and combine that with like developing the understanding of how to do an Olympic lift. You're on your way to become a pretty good athlete just from that as well.
Yeah, well, like growing up and playing sports myself, I didn't grow up with a lot of money or anything. So sports in Canada are relatively pretty expensive. My parents didn't put me in any sports, but the two things I did growing up is I did, funny enough, gymnastics and track and
Mm.
field. First athletic thing I ever did was gymnastics. My parents put me in gymnastics when I was like 3 years old, and I stayed doing it for a while. And then I got into track and field. And the sport I competed at most consistently up until high school was track and field. I did long jump. I ran the 100, the 4x100, and the 200 from kindergarten, almost grade first year, all the way to the end of high school. And I did other sports in between that, but that was the sport I did most consistently, and specifically those two events. And then I went to do other sports and was pretty bad at the skill side of many sports, but athletically could find some role on a lot of teams as a young person. And I'm not saying I made it anywhere in athletics, but even just talking about if people are working with kids or people have kids or you work with developmental kids, it's like you're saying, track and field is such a valuable experience. And to me, was one of the only athletic experiences I had. And I got to go into other things and be markedly okay at them. Even when I started to work out, I never lifted a weight in high school. I didn't lift a weight till after I graduated from school, but I went into the gym and with very poor technique could deadlift and squat and fake Olympic lift a lot of weight just from being relatively athletic outside of that. And it didn't come from playing sport. It came from doing track and field.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then when it comes to like, so you're working obviously with a lot of guys, so like they're trying to crush it into the NFL and the NHL
Yeah.
more specifically. What are some of the common traits, I guess? Not necessarily like physical aspects, because like we've said here, like it's, you can, that's a lot of variety depending. What are some
Yeah.
of like the common traits of these guys that do make it into these bigger leagues?
Yeah. Ability to learn. Guys who just have an ability, like have a high degree of physical literacy. And those people with a high degree of physical literacy oftentimes have backgrounds as multi-sport athletes: baseball, football, hockey, lacrosse, basketball, football, track and field, football. Anyone who did more than one sport has a higher degree of physical literacy because they've applied those same general athletic traits that they have to many different scenarios of problem solving. Those people are generally, the higher performers. People that can learn well, and people that can learn well usually had a more varied sports history. Other traits, I would say, people like we brought up earlier about working out, people who understand how they feel, people who are very in touch with knowing how much discomfort is good and how much discomfort is concerning, right? You never want an athlete who, yeah, just give me the weight, I'll do it, it's okay. I don't want that person, right? I want the person who goes, I don't think so today. They don't say that every day, but they go, yeah, my hip doesn't feel it today, or my adductor doesn't feel it. Those people oftentimes perform really well. People who know how they feel. And then last, but not least, I think when it comes into high performing athletes, it's athletes who ask why. One of the best athletes that I worked with was a guy who actually kept a notebook where he would write notes down of things that I said or stuff that we did. We would do an exercise and it would feel really good. And he'd go write in his notebook. He's like, this exercise, I feel this exercise is good. Or he'd ask why. Why do we do this? What does it do? Where do I need to feel it? Those athletes who are interested in the process, invested in the process, are oftentimes better learners as well. Football is a very highly cerebral sport that people don't realize. There's a lot of assignments to memorize, plays to memorize, things you need to be able to read. A high level of IQ is involved in football. And the football players that have a high degree of game IQ, oftentimes in the weight room as well, are a little bit more thoughtful in their approach to what you're doing with them. They remember exercises. They want to know what they're called or what they do. So yeah, I think those are the biggest traits, to be honest.
So they're kind of like, they're just generally more invested in what they're doing as well, like a deeper layer of care.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And then, so how are you setting goals for some of these guys? Obviously, ultimate goal, make it into this league or whatever, but you're breaking that down and obviously trying to be like, all right, one small step at a time. What are some strategies you're using there?
Yeah, so I think a big thing is constant personal accountability with athletes, right? Is making sure they feel nurtured in the process. And then alongside that, making sure they understand that they are largely responsible for that success as well. An athlete, when they're on the field, understands their responsibility, but outside of that, might not understand that a lot of that success comes from their own efforts, right? They don't really understand that you get out of an exercise what you put in. So I think a big thing with athletes is just being able to sit down with them on a relatively regular basis and have those conversations with them where you go, hey, listen, what do you need to do better this week? How do I support you in doing that better? What do you think doing X better in the weight room or at the field is going to have an impact on when it comes to your sport? See if they can relate what they're doing to their sport, right? Because they're going to be more invested if they go, yeah, I think I need to squat more because my legs feel weak on my first 3 steps.
Yeah. So just bringing them back to that why again as well, as to why they're doing things so they can start done. Like if you said to someone, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and it has, you've not really pulled it back to the end goal, they're going to be like, well, nah, I don't really want to because, I'm not believing or of the understanding that this is going to get me to where I want to be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one thing, whereas like I'll wait to introduce some movements to athletes until we do something on the field or in their sport that is representative in the movement that we're going to do in the gym. Some B stance movements, some GHD things, some impulse movements. It's like once we start learning the 3-point start for the 40-yard dash, then I bring them in the gym and then we do a whole boatload of B stance movements. It's not because now they're applicable, but it's because now when I give them that B stance movement, this athlete goes, oh, this is my start. And you go, yes. And they go, okay, got it. If I showed them some really tedious B stance movement day one and we hadn't done the 3-point start yet, they're just going to go whatever, and they're just going to do it like shit anyway. So I'm waiting for the opportunity where there is that association, right? Where they go, oh, is this for this? A step down. Oh, is this for whatever it might be? Great. Okay, now that they're, like you said, bought in and they understand it, you get that extra level of involvement.
Perfect. All right, well, we might wrap things up there. I really appreciate your time. There's lots of value for people to share there, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers, man.